It started with a few words at dinner. Nothing dramatic. No raised voice. No slammed door. Just a sentence, the kind that lands quietly and then stays. You've always been like this. You believe in Buddhism, you live simply. You say that's enough. But look around. We're not getting ahead. You're not getting ahead. And you're fine with that. Maybe the words were different for you. Maybe it was, you're not ambitious. Or you let life pass you by. Or the one that cuts deepest, delivered not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. I just thought you'd be more by now. And then something happened. Not 5 minutes later. Not after thinking about it. Immediately. A tightening. Heat somewhere in the chest. A familiar pull toward defending yourself, explaining yourself, proving something. That movement right there is what this video is about. Not the words. Not the person who said them. That movement. Before we go further, I want to name something honestly. If you've chosen a life shaped by Buddhist values, simplicity, contentment, not chasing status or wealth, you've probably heard this more than once. Not from strangers. From the people closest to you. Your spouse. Your adult children. A sibling who watched you take a different path and can't quite understand it. And because they are the people you love, the words don't just pass through. They find something. What exactly do they find? That is the real question. There is a teaching, one of the earliest we have, that describes the mind's encounter with experience as a sequence. Not random. Not chaotic. A sequence. Something happens in the world. It makes contact. A feeling arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Then the mind begins to interpret, to judge, to construct meaning. Then action or reaction follows. Most of us live almost entirely in the last step. We are already reacting before we have any idea what the earlier steps were. Your spouse said something, and before you could observe anything, you were already there in the reaction. Already defending. Already hurt. Already rehearsing the response you didn't give. The teaching is not asking you to stop the reaction. It is asking you to look earlier. What actually happened, step by step, before the reaction was already fully formed. Here is what happened honestly, precisely. A sound arrived at your ear. That is the first fact. Just sound. Then immediately, a feeling arose in the body. Not a thought. Not a judgment. A feeling. Tightness, heat. A kind of weight in the chest or the stomach. This feeling in Buddhist understanding is called Vedana. And the important thing about it is this: it is not your fault. It is not weakness. It is not spiritual failure. It is the natural, automatic response of a body-mind that has been touched by something unpleasant. The feeling arose on its own. You did not choose it. Up to this point, you have done nothing wrong. But then something else happened. The mind began to move. Not just feeling the feeling, but adding to it. Building on top of it. Who does she think she is to say that? I've given everything to this family. She doesn't understand what I believe or why. Maybe she's right. Maybe I have failed. No, she's wrong. I can prove she's wrong. Each of those thoughts, each one is not the original feeling. Each one is something the mind constructed on top of the feeling. and each construction created more suffering than the one before it. This is what the teaching calls the second arrow. The first arrow was the words. They landed. The feeling arose. The second arrow, the third, the fourth, the fifth, we fire ourselves. Not in one moment. Over hours. Over days. Replaying the conversation. Rehearsing what we should have said. Arguing in our own minds with someone who has long since moved on to other things. The original moment ended. Your spouse walked away. Dinner continued. The evening passed. But the arrows kept flying. Because the mind kept drawing the bow. There is a moment, perhaps you've noticed it, somewhere in the middle of a long marriage, when you are no longer really arguing with your spouse. You are arguing with an idea. The idea of who you are. The idea of what your life should mean. The idea of whether the choices you've made were worth it. Your spouse said a few words, but what the mind picked up and began wrestling with, that was much older than the dinner table. That was the story of the self. And here is the thing about the story of the self. It doesn't feel like a story. It feels like the floor beneath your feet. When someone says something that seems to contradict the story, even one sentence, the reaction is not about the sentence. It is about the floor. Because if they are right, even a little, what does that mean about everything you've built your life on? So the question the teaching offers quietly, without urgency, is this: what actually got touched? Not in accusation. Not to make you feel worse. Just as an honest observation. When your spouse said you're not ambitious or you've settled, what moved? Was it genuine hurt? Or was it something defending itself? And if something was defending itself, what exactly was it protecting? I want to stay with this a moment longer. Because there is a version of Buddhist teaching that gets this wrong. It says nothing should bother you. A truly awakened person feels no pain. That is not what the teaching says. The teaching says pain is real. Feeling is real. The tightening in the chest is real. What the practice offers is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel without immediately becoming the feeling. To hear harsh words and experience the discomfort without needing the discomfort to mean something catastrophic about who you are. The feeling is not you. The reaction is not you. They are events passing through awareness. Venerable Veen Min once said, "When we are angry and we know we are angry, there is no longer something called us being angry. The knowing itself is not angry. That is not a technique to develop. It is something to notice, right in the middle of the moment when someone you love says something that cuts. The knowing is there, even before the defense rises up, even before the second arrow flies. Yet the hurt is not the whole of what is happening. The knowing of the hurt is already there. Now a different question. One that takes more courage than defending yourself. Once the tightening settles a little, not gone, just quieter, is there anything true in what was said? Not to punish yourself with it. Not to give ground you don't actually need to give. But honestly, clearly, is there any truth here? Maybe none at all. Maybe your spouse is speaking from fear, from a different set of values, from the pressure of a world that measures worth by bank accounts and titles. Maybe the words came from anxiety, about the future, about money, about being okay. In that case, look at that clearly. See the source. The words were not really about you. They were the sound of someone else's worry, wearing the shape of a sentence about your character. And when you see that clearly, the struggle is often no longer the same. Not forgiveness exactly. Not agreement. Just seeing why the words came. But sometimes, and this takes more stillness to see, there is something in there. Not the harshness, not the contempt, but underneath it, a question worth sitting with. Am I living with genuine contentment? Or am I using Buddhist ideas to avoid looking at something uncomfortable? Is there something I could do differently? Not to satisfy someone else's measure of success, but because it would actually be better. The teaching does not ask you to abandon simplicity. It asks you to see clearly. And seeing clearly sometimes means allowing the possibility that even words spoken unkindly can point at something real. Not all of them. Maybe not this one. But the willingness to look without the armor of the story of the self. That willingness is itself part of the practice. There is still the question of what to do. Because life requires action. Relationships require speech. Silence has a place. When the mind is not yet clear, when speaking would only be reacting, when the moment is wrong. Silence can be wise. But silence that is just compression, just swallowing the heat and waiting for it to fade, that is not practice. That is storage. And what is stored does not disappear, it waits. So when is it right to speak? When the tightening has settled enough that you are no longer speaking from the wound. When you are not trying to win. When you are not trying to restore an image. When you can say what is true, and then let it land where it lands. Something like, I hear what you're saying. I know you're worried about our future. But the way you said it makes it hard for me to really listen. Can we talk about what you're actually afraid of? Or simply, that didn't feel fair. I'd like to talk about it, but not like that. That is not weakness. That is not losing ground. That is speaking from clarity instead of from the wound. There is a stillness in that kind of speech. You may have felt it once in some conversation long ago, when you said something honest to someone close to you without needing anything back. There was a cleanness to it. That cleanness is often already there when the story of the self is quieter. Here is what Venerable Veen Min pointed to directly. When someone attacks you, that is the moment your teacher appears. Right there in your own reaction, you can see exactly what is happening. Calm or anger, softness or hardness. And yet people cannot bear to stay with that long enough to learn from it. The person who said the harsh words, they did not create your suffering. They revealed something that was already there. If there were no fear of being seen as inadequate, the words "you're inadequate" would have much less power. If there were no anxiety about whether your life has been well lived, the question, have you wasted your life, would not land so deeply. This is not an accusation. It is a map. The words showed you where something is still being held, where something still needs to be defended, where the story of the self is still protecting a floor that might not need protecting at all. You cannot control what is said to you. You cannot always control the tightening that comes after. But there is a space, narrow at first, wider with time, between the sound and the reaction. In that space, the knowing of what is happening can be noticed. The hurt may be there. The defensiveness may be there. The fear may be there. And the knowing of them is there too. It is not something you create. It can simply be noticed whenever experience is seen as it is. Just this, the knowing of what is happening before the story begins again. If this kind of seeing matters to you, there is more here.